It's time to rank the MCU once again, because with Thunderbolts finally in theaters, we have 36 MCU movies to rank from worst to best. Now, this won't include anything that's premiered on Disney+. We're saving that giant MCU ranking for the end of the year. We're just primarily talking about the movies today, and I'm very excited to be getting into this. So make sure to leave your thoughts down below, hit that like and subscribe button, and without further ado, let's get into this. Coming in at my number 36 is Captain Marvel, and if you've watched any of my rankings before, the way I rank them is basically, would I rather rewatch this or this? And Captain Marvel is one of the few films I have never rewatched ever since it has come to home video, Disney+, all sorts of things like that. I have just never cared to go back to this movie. I saw it twice in the theaters, and twice was just enough. For me, this is a very forgettable movie, and it sucks because I think Brie Larson is a fantastic actress. I think everything with her on Earth with Samuel L. Jackson is phenomenal. It just feels like they did not know the story that they wanted to have here, and I find this film to be incredibly forgettable. We have at my number 35, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. This is maybe one of my most disappointing films in the MCU. I know there is fun to be had in here. I know there are films worse than this movie, and I know in fact that people like this movie a lot more. Trust me, my list is very controversial. But when it comes down to it, in the end of the day, I was so disappointed by this movie. It's one of the few MCU films I do not own on Blu-ray, usually for the fact that I just don't care for this film. And I think a lot of that is because of the usage and how they frame this. What clear direction they could have used this for the MCU just did not work. Now, obviously things in Hollywood happened and that kind of just streamlined everything, but I believe if Kang was initially set up better in this, then possibly they would have recasted her, still used the same character. And I think Kang is a really cool character and they should have, but regardless, that's a different conversation for a different time. The visual effects are a mess in here. I was disappointed in the ending of this. I've said that countless times in multiple different videos, and overall, I found this to be just an absolute disappointment. Get into my number 34, and that is The Marvels. Now, I actually have a soft spot for The Marvels. I think this is a fun movie, but it's also not one that I ever have the urge to go back and rewatch. I enjoyed it for the one-time watch. It felt like a mess. It felt like it was way too short. It felt like we were just going to the point, but the three ladies that we have running the show here, I thought were fantastic. I thought their chemistry was great, and again, I liked their performances. I just wish they were surrounded with a better movie. And it's my number 33, and that is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Again, another fun movie. A fun one. In fact, at one point in time, I actually kind of enjoyed rewatching this more than the previous Ant-Man. Over time, things change and things sour. And for me, as I look at this movie, especially in the whole chronological nature of the MCU, it's just kind of forgettable. It has fun moments to it. I like how they play around with the Ant-Man and the Wasps and the shrinking and the growing and all sorts of things like that. And it makes it fun, but it's very much just a side adventure in the MCU that if you're looking for something that's mindless, you can put on in the background, this is that movie. But I expect a little bit more from the Ant-Man franchise, primarily because the first one is so underrated. And in my number 32, and I think a lot of people are going to have this film very low, but this is Thor: The Dark World. Now, I think a lot of this is kind of just primarily nostalgia with the original phases of the MCU and primarily with the phases that we're getting now. And I'm not here to like say Thor: The Dark World is actually a good movie. No, it's a very messy movie. At times it's even a very dull and boring movie, but for me, I really like what they did with Thor in here, and specifically him and Loki. I think that is the best dynamic of this. And when I look at the previous films on this list, I would rather go back and rewatch Thor: The Dark World. Is that to say that it's a great movie? No. But it's better than the other ones, in my opinion. I think in some ways, shapes and forms. I think there is fun to be had in this movie, specifically with that relationship. And I also really like how it ties into the overall MCU with the ether. But again, it is messy. It is dull. They ruined the Dark Elves. Like, the Dark Elves are some of the coolest things in the comic books, in my personal opinion, when it comes down to Thor. So that's why it's down here. Number 31 is Iron Man 2. This is an interesting one because I think there's so much fun to be had in this. You have Iron Man, you have Rhodey, they're joining together. You have Whiplash, you have freaking Sam Rockwell as one of the main villains. You're setting up the Avengers. There's a lot of fun sequences, but primarily enough fun sequences and great action scenes. You also need a good story. And Iron Man 2 for me is just that typical story you get in the middle of your trilogy for a superhero or a hero or whatever. Something that we've seen before, it's clunky, and it very much just feels like a setup movie. Setup movies can work, but in the light that Iron Man 2 has at work, it's not the best. And I equivalent Iron Man 2 to being one of those films that runs on FX all the time. You can put on in the background and rewatch, and you can enjoy it for what it is, but it's not one that you intentionally go, I'm going to watch Iron Man 2. Number 30 is The Incredible Hulk. This is, of course, the one without Mark Ruffalo, and I have a soft spot for this. I think it's cool to see this version of the Hulk just go berserk, just go crazy. I really like what Edward Norton did with the role. I really like the on-the-run nature, and I think it was cool to have a Hulk movie in the MCU. Plus, the Hulk and Abomination fight scene at the end is amazing. I really like that we got a lot of follow-ups finally in Brave New World. Whatever you may feel about that movie, I think those follow-ups were actually good, especially with Ross's character. But every time I go back to watch this movie, this is one of the ones that I expect to like more, and I end up just kind of liking. I think it's a good movie, but it's not one that, I think there's better stories they could have told. My number 29, and this is the original Thor. And again, this is another soft spot one. I think the universe of Asgard is so incredible, but as I've mentioned countless times, and I understand the thematics of what they were trying to do with Thor's character, I feel like leaving Asgard and going to Earth for a majority of your film is maybe not the best light. Now, I understand the budget was probably smaller. They probably couldn't do everything they wanted to do, and Kenneth Branagh made it work with what he needed to work. I'm so intrigued with Asgard that it always kind of rubs me the wrong way how much we leave Asgard and how much we spend time on Earth, and the characters on Earth are a little bit annoying, and Chris Hemsworth's great as the character. Good origin story. I just genuinely wanted more from this first film. And my number 28, and this is Captain America Brave New World, which I still will contain. It's a good movie. I think everything from here on up are basically just good, solid MCU films, or maybe even a little bit better once we get a little bit higher. But Brave New World, for me, I never got the hate. It is messy. It feels like it's mashed together. It feels like it's a Frankenstein monster at times, and I will never deny that. There are issues in this, but for Sam Wilson's first outing, which he deserved better, I still liked the action. I thought the action was fantastic. I liked the twists and turns. I liked the espionage kind of thriller that we were getting here, and I think for me, there is great ideas. But first and foremost, this should have been a Captain America movie. This is more of an Incredible Hulk and Eternals follow-up, which is nice because I think in the same sense, I also think there's a clear direction of where the MCU is supposed to be going after all the multiple reshoots. And I think that's the direction that they started to head really much in this. And I think the build-up to get to Red Hulk is actually pretty satisfying. I really like that final fight scene. I wish some of the visual effects were a little bit stronger, but hey, I can't complain there. This kind of seems like the best and the worst of what the MCU has been doing post-Endgame, and I think it kind of just varies on who you are. I think Brave New World's underrated. I think it's good. You might hate it. That's okay. Number 27 is Captain America, the First Avenger. This is just another good, solid MCU film where I really have no qualms. I think it's just a great little origin story. And honestly, my only issue, the only reason it's not higher on this list is I actually wish it was longer. I hate the montage stuff. Every time I've gone back to rewatch the movie, I always find myself disappointed with that montage sequence because it montages stuff with Peggy, it montages stuff with Bucky. There's so many of these different dynamics that I feel like if we would have gotten just a couple more scenes and set up for that, it really would have paid off more for Chris Evans, Captain America, Steve Rogers through the MCU and up until Endgame. But I digress. This is still an action-packed, fun, awesome movie that provides a lot of entertainment. And then my number 26, and I think this might be the first controversial pick for most people. Every time I do this list, everyone's always like, why is this so low? I don't get it. Thor Ragnarok is my number 26. I think there's fun in this. I enjoy it. I love Gladiator Hulk. I love all the fight scenes. I love Valkyrie's introduction. I love Loki. I love Chris Hemsworth's Thor. I just didn't like the story for this. And I think a lot of that really comes down to this should be the darkest story you are telling in Thor's life, and a lot of it is played for jokes. You'll have a joke, and it ruins a dramatical storytelling, which I think Taika Waititi can tell dark stories with comedy. He did it with Jojo Rabbit, which I know is not everyone's favorite, but personally for me, I love Jojo Rabbit. It's like every time I go back to Thor Ragnarok, it's like I enjoy it, and then the joke ruins a thing, which is funny because a lot of people have that issue with Thor Love and Thunder, which is a film that I actually like a little bit more. I know, controversial. Trust me, I don't do it on purpose. I wish I wasn't wired this way. Over now to my number 25 is Spider-Man Homecoming, a solid first Spider-Man film in the MCU, and overall the smallest scale Spider-Man film that we've ever had yet. Tom Holland is fantastic in this. I love being able to see a Peter Parker actually in high school, and as well as giving the Vulture some time to shine. This is a villain that I'm very hit or miss with. I've never really loved him in the comics. I've never really loved different interpretations of him, and this was actually one of the first times where I'm like, I love what you're doing with this. I think Michael Keaton played the role perfectly. I think there's a great twist in there for people who have never seen the Spider-Man films, and for me, I think Homecoming is just an excellent movie that I wish had a little bit of stronger action set pieces, but still, on a small scale, it provides great balance for Peter Parker. We get on my number 24, and that's Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Now, Multiverse of Madness, I think for me, in a way, is a satisfying mess. It's absolutely Sam Raimi at his best when he's directing. I think direction flair, it is one of the strongest directed films in the MCU, but it also has one of the messiest scripts I have seen in the MCU. And I think a lot of that comes down to actually Doctor Strange's character and some of the motivations from the Scarlet Witch. Now, for me, just the context, the best things about this. I think some of the visual effects in here are great. I think some of the direction of Sam Raimi's fight scenes in here are awesome. I love the usage of the magical powers and some of the stuff they use in the multiverse, including the Illuminati and killing them all. Mostly for me, I thought that was ballsy and bold. And while the first initial thought, I was a little disappointed in it, still walked away going, yeah, I really like that choice. The problem with Multiverse of Madness is it feels like it's just chugging along and moving so fast that there's never really development for our main character, Doctor Strange. And I feel like they give a lot of that development to Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch, which is totally fine. I love how they build her up from WandaVision and brought her to this. And I wish they would have done a little bit more with her, but Doctor Strange for me is the one that needed the most development in here. It is his film, and there's a sequence, and I always say this, between him and Christine Palmer, I think, the nurse. They're walking through this different multiverse. They're stuck here. They're looking for the other Strange that lives there. And they kind of just skip ahead. They're like, okay, we found him. Okay. And I wish we would have had conversations there, because there are specific thematics that I think were laying out through the film, and I never got to see those conversations had. I never got to see like the reality of those. And I think that for me is the most disappointing thing about Multiverse of Madness, and why it's lower on this list. I think it's a good movie. I think it's an entertaining movie, but it was one that disappointed me in that factor. It gets me to my number 23, and that is Ant-Man. Again, as I said earlier in this list, I think it's one of the most underrated MCU films. I think not enough people talk about Ant-Man. Ant-Man is a heist film at its lowest, but it also plays around with the idea of shrinking, like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and having an absolute blast with it. And I think Paul Rudd as Scott Lang is amazing, amazing casting, and I can't wait to see him in Avengers Doomsday and what direction they decide to use him there. For me, the character, this is such a great introduction and one of the best MCU origin stories, mostly for that same factor of what they're able to do with the character and the concept. We get into my number 22, and that is Doctor Strange. Now, the first Doctor Strange really blew my mind. Now, while I think they blew the door open and did not really do a great job with the villain aspect of it, I think it's a great setup for the mystical side of the MCU, and for me has always been one of the most colorful, imaginative, and beautiful films in the MCU, and also the thematics of this journey that Doctor Strange goes on, being someone who honestly should have been viewed as a hero, but in a way was just an asshole, and turning into the actual hero that he was supposed to be this entire time. And while he's still cocky, for me, I like that story of seeing someone who was ungrateful and goes to a place that is a journey he never expected to go. And I think that's awesome. I love Doctor Strange, and this is one of the few that anytime it's on, like if I'm flipping through the channels, I will sit down and watch the rest of it, because I just think it's so fun. And on my number 21, Iron Man 3. I think a lot of people have kind of come around on this one finally. Shane Black, I think, wrote a great script for Tony Stark. I don't think this is more of an Iron Man film as it is a Tony Stark film, and specifically as an epilogue to the events of Avengers. And I think in some ways, some of the things in here they've kind of retconned, especially with like destroying the suits by the end. But I also think what I really like about this is it actually really sets up Tony's dynamic for going into Avengers Age of Ultron, for going into Civil War. And I think his character arc is one of the best in the MCU, primarily because of the start of this movie and because of what he's dealing with after the events of the Avengers. And I found Iron Man 3 to be an awesome time. Yeah, I know in hindsight, people were disappointed with the Mandarin. It would have been cool to see Tony fight the Mandarin, but we got that in Shang-Chi, so let's not complain about it. Let's enjoy for what we have. Yes, is the villain the worst part about this film? Yeah, I mean, Killian's kind of boring, but Iron Man 3 is awesome. I really enjoyed this one. We get into my number 20, and that is Love and Thunder. Again, I know people hate this movie, and I'm not going to sit here and try and defend it once again, because I defend it on every single one of these rankings, but like part of me like low-key wants this to be a little bit higher, and I don't know why. I have a lot of love for the comic book that this is based off of, and I won't lie, there are issues with this. I wanted more of Gore killing the gods. I wanted the film to be a little bit longer and a little bit more serious and no screaming goats, but there are moments in this film that really hit me hard thematically. And the two scenes that really come to light is the ending scene of Gore deciding on what to do with Eternia, and then Thor, of course, taking over, and then the Love and Thunder thing. I don't know why, like that just hits me hard, like the title of this film. But it's also the boat scene between Thor and Jane Foster as they talk about her cancer. And there's something about that. I know there's a couple jokes here and there, but they never cut away and ruin that moment for me. And I found Thor Love and Thunder to just be fun. The opening scene with the Guardians is a blast. And while there are issues with the movie, its themes and its jokes, I know, stupid. I do not get why I'm wired this way. I enjoy more. And I really have a soft spot for Thor Love and Thunder. I cannot deny it. I've probably rewatched this one the most, and I do not know why. My number 19 now is Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I really love Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I would say here and on up are films that I can almost just about say that I thoroughly love. And Wakanda Forever is a meditation on grief for everyone around. And at the same time, it's also a story about introducing Talocan, Namor. And I loved that introduction. It's a film that it strikes hard with emotion. And I think for me, the only reason is the last time I went back to rewatch it, I found a lot of the subplots like with Val and Everett Ross just to not really be needed. I think if you cut that out and maybe even possibly got rid of Ironheart, who I like the character, I just kind of think like slowed down the story a little bit and just focused on the dynamic with what was going on here, I think it would have been a little bit stronger. I understand you got to set up stuff in the MCU, but that's like one of the few things that I feel like it would have helped the pacing of the movie. But everything across the board, Angela Bassett probably gives one of the best performances in the entire MCU. I mean, regardless, like she should have won Best Supporting Actress that year, in my opinion. For Stephanie Hsu, I think this is the same year Everything Everywhere All at Once was also nominated, and Stephanie should have won that too. I really like Wakanda Forever. It's not one that I totally want to rewatch, but it's one that I very much appreciate and I do love. Into my number 18, that's Spider-Man Far From Home, one that I have just an absolute soft spot for. A lot of people hate this movie. I think some people do still really love it, and for me, I still do. I think it's a great progression again for Peter Parker coming off of the events of Avengers Endgame. What is he dealing with in the light of Tony Stark being dead? What is his personal path? And I think, again, once you look at No Way Home and you look back at the entire direction of Peter's arc, whether it was planned or not, the way that it all plays off and pays off is, for me, what really works. Now, Mysterio, for me, has always been my favorite Spider-Man villain. I love the design, I love the look, I love the powers, and I've always been fascinated to see how they were going to be able to make him work in live action. For me, Far From Home still has the most innovative action scenes in a Spider-Man film. I think John Watts actually really went really hard on those sequences with Mysterio, and the fact that they used Mysterio so well and still made him out to be a loser. Played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who I love, and who did a great job with this. I can't deny it. I'm all on board with that. And Far From Home is one of my most rewatched movies in the MCU. And it was also one of my wife's first date night movies. So, yes, I love Far From Home. Number 17 is Avengers Age of Ultron. I absolutely love this movie. It is a mess. I know there's issues. There's too many storylines, but I love the usage of Ultron. I like actually seeing that the team is already built together. They're working together and cementing the same seeds at the same time for Civil War and certain differences that they may have. They gave development to Hawkeye more. They gave development to other characters more, specifically Black Widow. Hulk and Black Widow relationship in here actually works, and I wish they would have touched on that a little bit harder in the future. Overall, Age of Ultron is a really good follow-up to the Avengers film. It's going to be hard to follow up one of the greatest comic book movies of all time, and I think they followed it up with a pretty damn great sequel that just had one too many plot lines, and I think if you would have wiped out a couple of those, this would be hailed as maybe even better than the first Avengers. Controversial take coming up next at my number 16, Black Widow. I think after seeing Thunderbolts, I appreciate this film even more now, and I think that's the reason it's a little bit higher, but I have always really liked Black Widow, but I think now I'm kind of like in the camp of loving it, and I think I would say that this is one of the MCU's best if it wasn't for the third act. I think the third act is just a tad bit too overly big for the stakes of what this film were. It's also the usage of the main villain and Taskmaster. It just always rubs me the wrong way, but you actually gave development to Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow. And while this film came out at a very weird time, COVID, also just in the MCU structure of stuff, this should have been a film that came out after Civil War. Still can't attest to that more, that this came out at a bad time. And I think that's what really rubbed people the wrong way. It was like, why are we going back to this? Well, it's because Scarlett Johansson deserved a Black Widow movie years ago. And she got it, and I thought it was awesome. I love the action scenes. I really love her and her family. I think that's like the biggest aspect is the family. And you cast an incredible cast along the way. Rachel Weisz, David Harbour, Florence Pugh. Amazing casting right there. And the fact that David Harbour is the Red Guardian, who's a super soldier for Russia. Amazing. Then you have Yelena, who is already one of the best characters, but such a great standout. And for me, it's the characters that stand out above anything in Black Widow. I love how espionage heavy this is. This is, again, one of those films that I actually randomly think about and I've genuinely loved. I think too many people hate this movie, and I wish more people would give it another shot. Especially after Thunderbolts, I've gained a higher appreciation for this one. Oh, my number 15 is another controversial take. I think more people are starting to come to the point of loving it, but I think a lot of people still hate this movie, and that's Eternals. I absolutely loved Eternals. I love Eternals. I almost think it's perfect. I think it's a little too long, but I love the Eternals. I love the characters in here. I love the dynamic of them and having to build them back together. And when they're all together, all the different powers and the usages and the way that Chloe Zhao shot the film is just absolutely stunning to me. Icarus is an amazing character. Makari and Druig, I love their relationship. Thena, amazing. Gilgamesh, great. I think genuinely, I think maybe the only bad part about this movie is the character that Cersei, that they decide to focus on. She's not a bad character, but out of all the Eternals, she was like my least favorite one besides Sprite. But I just love this entire cast of characters. I love the casting of all of them. Fastos, Killa, I can't remember Kumail Nanjiani's name. That's the only one I can't remember, but I love him. And again, you have great action. You have great new mythology added to the MCU in such a unique light. It's shot immensely and incredibly well, thematically layered. This, for me, is a giant epic and a giant swing that the MCU took that I wish they would have taken more of. And I think things like the Thunderbolts and what it dives into the thematics as well is kind of one of those swings, but in the same way of going and harkening back to classic MCU stuff. I think Eternals is one of those awesome, unique things too. I cannot recommend this film enough. I absolutely love Eternals, and I just... I might go rewatch it again this weekend. Oh, my number 14 is Captain America Civil War. Captain America Civil War is just a damn amazing film at its best. The only reason it's lower on this list compared to many others is I wish there was higher stakes in this. I won't lie. But seeing how Tony and Cap are so against each other, it really does make you stand with who was right and who was wrong. And I think even looking back now, especially with what's been going on in the MCU, is who was right and who was wrong. And I think those debates still are had to this date. The action is top tier. There's no denying that. Every single moment is fresh and very hard hitting. And it's funny, a lot of people talk about the airport fight scene, but I think for me, the two best fight scenes is when Bucky is going crazy and everyone's trying to stop him, and as well as the final one between Bucky, Iron Man, and Captain America. But you also have great introductions to Black Panther and Spider-Man in here. This, again, is just an all-time best comic book movie that I think if it would have just had higher stakes, it would be for me in the top 5 of the MCU of all time. My number 13 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, this might be the weakest of the Guardians of the Galaxy films, but it's one that has actually grown on me immensely because of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which I think only enhances the other two Guardians films to such a higher light, showcasing where those characters ended up and now getting to go back and see their journey. Each film makes sense for that, specifically for their relationships, for their team relationship, for their chemistry, their dynamics with one another. And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is very much, in a way, a nothing film because it only takes place in like one central location on frickin' giant ass Star-Lord's dad's body. But regardless, I like the way that they segmented the teams and the way that each of the different characters are learning something different from one another. And I think this is just one of those films that makes you appreciate Rocket, Groot, and Yondu more, makes you really come to love Nebula and Gamora's relationship, Star-Lord, especially just like that twist of hard hitting from when his dad admits about the tumor. It hits hard. I love this movie so much, and I wouldn't have been saying that if it wasn't for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but it made me appreciate this film a lot. Then at my number 12 is Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi for me is just a film that I expected to like, but did not expect to love, and a lot of that kind of goes to the lore that it builds up. I love Tony Leung as the Mandarin. I think he is a phenomenal character in here as Wenwu. I think Simu Liu did an incredible job as Shang-Chi. I love the dragon lore. I think just everything that Destin Cretton did with this is the reason that he is doing the next Spider-Man movie and is the reason that he was going to originally direct Avengers, the Kang Dynasty. I love Shang-Chi. I really don't have too many far issues with this one. This is just one of those films. And I would say that here and on up, I'm basically like, yeah, I love this movie. For me, Shang-Chi is one of the most rewatchable films in the MCU. My number 11, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Another film that a lot of people probably have a little bit higher on this list. And for me, this is one of the most rewatchable ones. It's probably the one that I rewatch at least once a year. And I always enjoy it. I always have fun with it. I always think it's so intense. I love the twist of Bucky being the Winter Soldier, and I still go back to like remember seeing that in the theater, and when that event happened, my mind was blown. I remember the event in the theater, how many people's minds were blown. I'm sitting there as the comic book fan going, I knew that. But everyone's reaction was great, and I always think back to that. The action's top tier here. I mean, you're going to hear me say top tier to a lot of these Russo brother films because they really are, for the MCU, top tier. And I think this is the one that really steamrolled Chris Evans' Captain America from being that joyous Boy Scout that some of us think of Captain America to be, to actually a hero that has a lot of multi-layered stuff. And this is the film that made me go, oh, I really like Captain America as a character. Prior to this, I hadn't really, like, I enjoyed his character, but he was always like one of my least favorites on the team. I meant to Chris Evans for me as an all-time casting for a superhero, and I love the Winter Soldier. Into my number 10, which is Iron Man. I think the original Iron Man almost always has to be in my top 10. Maybe it'll still be in there once Fantastic Four comes out. Maybe it won't. I don't know. A lot of these things switch around as you kind of rewatch some stuff. But for me, Iron Man's just, it was the perfect start to the MCU in every sort of light, but also in the same frame of mind. It was just a good movie. It was just a damn good movie. And that's one of the things I've always said, is that the MCU really succeeded in the first 3 phases by most for the time making good movies and then sprinkling in little setups for the future that make you intrigued to see where this is all going. And Iron Man was about that. It was very much in its own frame of mind, its own film, until you get to that post-credit scene where it blew the door off. I think that's the reason that I really liked Thunderbolts, specifically for what it is, but we'll talk about that in a second. Iron Man for me is just that film that knew where it was going. It gave a hard-hitting first introduction to Tony Stark. This is kind of a little bit retrofitted just because of the time that it was released. There's certain things in here are not dated well, specifically in like terms of a blockbuster. It definitely feels like a blockbuster from the late 2000s. I still can't deny how much I enjoy Iron Man, and every time it comes on or anytime I put it on, I'm instantly locked back in. Now we get to my number 9, and it's the brand new Thunderbolts. I loved the Thunderbolts. And I think for me, this is a film that you can go watch my full non-spoiler review. I just vented about how this film is, while not just a comic book movie, it's a self-reflection movie. It's one that makes you self-reflect on your depression, grief, trauma, fulfillment in life. And it actually really makes you feel seen. I think there's a character that anyone will be able to latch on into here. And the fact that that's the thematic of the film, but also it ties back to the main villain of the film, the Sentry, the Void, Bob, and what he goes through and what the powers that he has can be used. And the entire usage of the Void, I think, is phenomenal because it really ties in to that whole idea. The fact that Jake Schreier, the director of this, really cemented that makes the Thunderbolts a special movie just in that own light. But the best thing about the Thunderbolts is that, as I mentioned with Iron Man, it's a damn good movie with really hard-hitting themes that you would not expect to get in a comic book movie. But then at the end of the film, and this is spoilers. I mean, you know what? I won't spoil it, you know. But you get to the end of the film, and they say something. You find out what that asterisk is for. And while I guessed it, like, before going in, I love that. Because it sets up something you're like, oh, that's going to change. Me, that changes the MCU for a little bit and adds some unique things going into the future. But no, not just that. Thematically, it hits that point very well for all the characters. Then you get into the post-credit scene, which is basically an epilogue, and I think it's the longest post-credit scene yet, and one of the best in my opinion. I actually might do a video talking about my top 10 favorite post-credit scenes because I think there needs to be a discussion on that, and I think I really want to defend this one primarily, but I love the same aspect too. I love how they touch on that, and it's not just the final tease in that post-credit scene that really gets me. For me, it's everything leading up to that. It's discussions of what's happening in the MCU right now. And that is what excites me for Avengers Doomsday now. We get into my number 8, and that is Black Panther. This is the introduction of Wakanda, like the actual one, and for me, this was a winner. I think Ryan Coogler interjected so much adrenaline and love into culture for this film, and for me, Chadwick Boseman is the perfect, absolute Black Panther we could have ever had. And rest in peace to him. I mean, every time I go back to watch Black Panther, it really hits me like a fucking stone of how incredible he is in this. And also how incredible the cast around him is. I think they just casted this film so great. His sister, the Dora Milaje, to an off character like M'Baku, Winston Duke, is such a standout too. So much the culture of Wakanda and the development and everything that it really speaks about legacy. And I really like how Killmonger comes in and you think, oh, he's just going to be this douchebag dick. And he is for the most part, but he has his reasons. He has his own thoughts. And there's things that T'Challa's dad had also messed up on. And I really love the dynamic of that and that shifting capability. And again, I think only Ryan Coogler was going to be able to lay this out. Get into my number 7, Spider-Man No Way Home. I absolutely love this movie. I think, again, as I said, this is the reason that the other Spider-Man films, in a way, are enhanced because of Peter Parker's ending arc in his high school trilogy of some sort. This is the first one that really actually made me fall in love with him and Zendaya. I really liked them in Far From Home, but I think this was the one that just established them perfectly as a couple in this universe. I really liked the swinging. I like the usage of all that. But in the end of the day, the reason that this film works is because it is a Spider-Man story. And it is a love letter to Spider-Man films all around in live action. And bringing in Tobey and Andrew, while, again, if they didn't show up, this film would still be really good just because of everything that's kind of hitting. But when they show up, they are used to such a capacity that I don't even think they're cameos. They are characters for this story. And nostalgically, it hits hard for me. But at the same time, it really hits hard for so many people in terms of what it means for their points in the story. I think for me, every time I've gone back to watch No Way Home, I enjoy the first half for what it is. But once you get into that back half, I think everything changes. Get into my number 6, and this is Deadpool and Wolverine. I think on the surface, there are issues with this movie. I know. But this is one of the most films that I was ever worried about, because Logan is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time, and Deadpool is also one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. And you're bringing an actor out of retirement that I didn't think we ever really needed, but at the same time, it's going to be awesome to see him with Deadpool. And also Deadpool 2 was a little bit of a disappointment to me. Deadpool and Wolverine succeeded exactly in what it needed to do. It needed to have heart, and that's the reason they got Sean Levy, who was another thing and factor that I was a little bit nervous about, because he'd never done an R-rated film. But Deadpool and Wolverine succeeded because it's not just a love letter to the Fox universe, which is really cool that they did that. I did not expect that. It's hilarious. It's action-packed. The action is some of the best in the absolute MCU, as well as in Deadpool. It's bloody. There's a lot of crazy shit that happens. Blade is in here. Channing Tatum's Gambit. I mean, so many cool things there. But in the end of the day, the reason that this works is, as I said, because of the heart. And if Deadpool is the heart of this, Wolverine is the soul of it. And the whole theme and message, because every Deadpool film has one, is about finding your place in the world when you feel like there's nothing. That just works. And the way that they layered that out with Hugh Jackman, this version of Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, perfect. Perfect for me. Get into my number 5, and this is Avengers. Avengers is just, for me, I think it's safe to say this is a classic film. In years to come, whether you love the MCU or not, film classes will talk about what the Avengers accomplished, because it was the first successful cinematic universe to pull this off. And this is one of my most rewatched films in theaters. I saw this every weekend it was in theaters that summer with one of my friends. We went every single weekend. We'd go to the mall, we'd hang out, and then we'd like, let's go see a movie. Oh, we've seen everything else. Let's see the Avengers again. And it was so good. I think this is one of those films that just gets better and better and better as the film goes on. Usually the film, it's like, oh, it plateaus and peaks in the middle, or it peaks right here. Now, this is the film that peaks at the very end. And again, with what it sets up, and now when you look at the entirety of the MCU now, I think Avengers is just the culmination of all that and where it truly started. Into my number 4, Guardians of the Galaxy, a film that I absolutely love. And for me, I've spoken years and years and years how I love this film so much. I love the characters. I love the origin story to them. I like how the origin of their team actually comes together and how it feels fresh and fluid and organic. And James Gunn does such a great job with that. Plus, the humor knitted throughout here is great. For the longest time, this was my favorite MCU film. And sometimes I even want to argue with myself to put it at my number 1 again. But for me, it's just a film that I love going back to, and I think everyone should love it. Then we get into my number 3, and that is Avengers Infinity War, an all-timer for action and for movement. When you ask me for a setup film, in the end of the day, Infinity War is a setup film. But it is one that puts the villain in the forefront, telling his story of what's going on, and dives very hard into the action of it all. And Infinity War for me is an amazing film that I will always go back to and enjoy the ever-living shit out of. You get to my number 2. And maybe it's recency bias because I just rewatched it, but Avengers Endgame. I've kind of always gone back and forth if I liked Infinity War more or Endgame, but today I'm going to stick with Endgame being my favorite above those two. And I think it's just the payoff of what's in Infinity War, but specifically Endgame is the payoff of the entire MCU up until that point. The character arcs within Black Widow and Tony Stark, I think, are two of the best that really hit some hard-hitting points. Same thing with even Steve Rogers and his dynamic with where that's going. But it's also a film that builds. It's a film that builds. It starts as an epilogue to Infinity War, dives strictly right into what is going on in this universe and living in that moment and taking its time to live in that moment, getting into how are we going to fix this. And then the last hour of this is one of the best cinematic events of all time. I do not know how the MCU will ever hit that ending again without just bringing in nostalgia. That third act is one of the most satisfying and emotional conclusions to a film I've ever invested myself into. And every time I get to it, I think to myself, God damn. My number one MCU film, it still is since I've seen it, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I know there's arguments to be had, but this is not the best MCU film, but it's my personal list. And as much as I've loved the Guardians, they're some of my favorite comic book characters. Honestly, if you ask me for a top 10 of my MCU, a lot of them are in my top 10. Volume 3 does something where Endgame satisfied me with the Avengers. But even before that, the Guardians were some of my favorite characters in the MCU. Try not to get emotional here, but they ended their arc so perfectly in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 that I almost never want to see these characters ever again. Ever. Because of how they ended each one. And some of them ended in a way that I didn't even want them to end that way. Like Star-Lord and Gamora's relationship. I didn't want it to end that way. And then I watched the movie and I'm like, oh, it's perfect. It's perfect. It's a perfect ending. I love Volume 3 so much. I love what it has to say about the characters. I love the way it ends their storylines. I love the action in it. I mean, that one-shot take is amazing. I think the villain in this is the strongest villain they've had in their entire trilogy, and I think James Gunn wrote one of the best comic book movies ever made. And also, as of right now, the best comic book trilogy of all time. I think Spider-Verse will end up cementing and overpassing that, but this is one of those few films, far and few between, where, again, as I mentioned earlier in this video, it enhances the previous films in its trilogy. And I would even say it enhances the previous experiences you've had with those characters. Infinity War, Endgame, whatever it may seem. I love this movie so much. I will always champion it. I will always love it. I will always go back to it. I will always crush myself with it. And no matter what, I think this is a perfect movie. And that is my ranking of the MCU currently with the Thunderbolts. So make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you so much again for watching this, guys. And of course, until next time, stay classy.